Shipping Out on the Nearly Lethal Comforts of a Luxury Cruise by David Foster Wallace. The Four-Color Brochure, Part 1. I've now seen sucrose beaches and a water very bright blue. I've seen an all-red leisure suit with flared lapels. I've smelled suntan lotion spread over 2,100 pounds of hot flesh. I've been addressed as Mon in 3 different nations. I've seen 500 upscale Americans dance the electric slide. I've seen sunsets that looked computer enhanced. I have briefly joined a conga line. I've seen a lot of really big white ships. I've seen schools of little fish with fins that glow. I've seen and smelled all 145 cats inside the Ernest Hemingway residence in Key West, Florida. I now know the difference between straight bingo and prizo. I've seen fluorescent luggage and fluorescent sunglasses and fluorescent pince nez and over 20 different makes of rubber thong. I've heard steel drums and eaten conch fritters and watched a woman in silver lame projectile vomit inside a glass elevator. I have pointed rhythmically at the ceiling to the 2/4 beat of the same disco music I hated pointing at the ceiling to in 1977. I have learned that there are actually intensities of blue beyond very bright blue. I've eaten more and classier food than I've ever eaten. And done this during a week when I've also learned the difference between rolling in heavy seas and pitching in heavy seas. I've heard a professional cruise ship comedian tell folks without irony, but seriously. I've seen fuchsia pantsuits and pink sport coats and maroon and purple warm-ups and white loafers worn without socks. I've seen professional blackjack dealers so lovely they make you want to clutch your chest. I've heard upscale adult US citizens ask the ship's guest relations desk whether snorkeling necessitates getting wet, whether the trap shooting will be held outside, whether the crew sleeps on board, and what time the midnight buffet is. I now know the precise mixological difference between a slippery nipple and a fuzzy navel. I have, in 1 week, been the object of over 1,500 professional smiles. I've burned and peeled twice. I've met cruise staff with the monikers Mojo Mike, Cocoa Puff, and Dave the Bingo Boy. I have felt the full clothy weight of a subtropical sky. I have jumped a dozen times at the shattering flatulence of the gods-like sound of a cruise ship's horn. I've absorbed the basics of mahjong and learned how to secure a life jacket over a tuxedo. I've dickered over trinkets with malnourished children. I've learned what it is to become afraid of one's own cabin toilet. I've now heard, and am powerless to describe, reggae elevator music. I now know the maximum cruising speed of a cruise ship in knots, though I never did get clear on just what a knot is. I've heard people in deck chairs in all earnestness that it's the humidity rather than the heat. I've seen every type of arrhythmia, premelanomic lesion, liver spot, eczema, wart, papular cyst, potbelly, femoral cellulite, varicosity, collagen and silicone enhancement, bad tint, hair transplants that I've not taken, i.e., I have seen nearly naked a lot of people I would prefer not to have seen nearly naked. I've acquired and nurtured a potentially lifelong grudge against the ship's hotel manager, whose name was Mr. Dermatis, and who I now and henceforth christen Mr. Dermatitis. Footnote 1. Somewhere he'd gotten the impression that I was an investigative journalist and wouldn't let me see the galley, bridge, or staff decks, or interview any of the crew in an on-the-record way, and he wore sunglasses indoors and epaulettes, and kept talking on the phone for long stretches of time in Greek when I was in his office after I'd skipped the karaoke semifinals in the Rendezvous Lounge to make a special appointment to see him, and I wish him ill. End of footnote 1. An almost reverent respect for my table's waiter, and a searing crush on my cabin steward, Petra, she of the dimples and broad-candid brow, who always wore a nurse's starched and rustling whites and smelled of the cedary Norwegian disinfectant she swabbed bathrooms down with, and who cleaned my cabin within a centimeter of its life at least 10 times a day, but could never be caught in the actual act of cleaning. A figure of magical and abiding charm, and well worth a postcard all her own. I now know every conceivable rationale for somebody spending more than $3,000 to go on a Caribbean cruise. To be specific, voluntarily and for pay, I underwent a 7-night Caribbean 7NC cruise on board the MV Zenith, which no wag could resist immediately rechristening the MV Nadir, a 47,255-ton ship owned by Celebrity Cruises Inc., one of the 20-odd cruise lines that operate out of South Florida and specialize in mega ships. The floating wedding cakes with occupancies in 4 figures and engines the size of branch banks. Footnote number 2. Of the mega lines out of South Florida, there's also Commodore, Costa, Majesty, Regal, Dolphin, Princess, Royal Caribbean, Renaissance, Royal Cruise Line, Holland America, Cunard, Norwegian Cruise Line, Crystal, and Regency Cruises, plus the Walmart of the cruise industry, Carnival, which the other lines refer to sometimes as Carnivore. The present market's various niches, singles, old people, theme, special interest, corporate, party, family, mass market, luxury, absurd luxury, grotesque luxury, have all pretty much been carved and staked out and are now competed for viciously. The 7NC mega ship cruiser is a genre of ship all its own, like the destroyer. The ships tend to be designed in America, built in Germany, registered out of Liberia, and both captained and owned, for the most part, by Scandinavians and Greeks, which is kind of interesting, since these are the same peoples who have dominated sea travel pretty much forever. Celebrity Cruises is owned by the Chandri Group. The X on their 3 ships, smokestacks, isn't an X but a Greek chai, for Chandri, a Greek shipping family so ancient and powerful they apparently regarded Onassis as a punk. End of footnote 2. The vessel and facilities were, from what I now understand of the industry's standards, absolutely top hole. The food was beyond belief, the service unimpeachable, the shore excursions and shipboard activities organized for maximal stimulation down to the tiniest detail. The ship was so clean and white it looked boiled. The Western Caribbean's blue varied between baby blanket and fluorescent, likewise the sky. Temperatures were uterine. The very sun itself seemed preset for our comfort. The crew to passenger ratios was 1.2 to 2. It was a luxury cruise. All of the megalines offer the same basic product, not a service or a set of services, but more like a feeling. A blend of relaxation and stimulation, stressless indulgence and frantic tourism. That special mix of servility and condescension that's marketed under configurations of the verb to pamper. The verb positively studs to megalines various brochures, as you've never been pampered before. To pamper yourself in our jacuzzis and saunas. Let us pamper you. Pamper yourself in the warm zephyrs of the Bahamas. The fact that adult Americans tend to associate the word pamper with a certain other consumer product is not an accident, I think. And the connotation is not lost on the mass market megalines and their advertisers. Pampered to Death, Part 1. Some weeks before I underwent my own luxury cruise, a 16-year-old male did a half gainer off the upper deck of a megaship. The news version of the suicide was that it had been an unhappy adolescent love thing, a shipboard romance gone bad. But I think part of it was something no news story could cover. There's something about a mass market luxury cruise that's unbearably sad. Like most unbearably sad things, it seems incredibly elusive and complex in its causes, yet simple in its effect. On board the Nadir, especially at night, when all the ship's structured fun and reassurances and gaiety ceased, I felt despair. The word despair is overused and banalized now, but it's a serious word, and I'm using it seriously. It's close to what people call dread or angst, but it's not these things, quite. It's more like wanting to die in order to escape the unbearable sadness of knowing I'm small and weak and selfish, and going, without doubt, to die. It's wanting to jump overboard. I, who had never before this cruise actually been on the ocean, have for some reason always associated the ocean with dread and death. As a little kid, I used to memorize shark fatality data. Not just attacks, fatalities. The Albert Kogler fatality off Baker's Beach, California in 1963, Great White. The USS Indianapolis Smorgasbord off Tinian in 1945. Many varieties. Authorities think mostly Makos and Blacktip. Robert Shaw as Quint reprised the whole incident in 1975's Jaws, a film, as you can imagine, that was like fetish porn to me at age 13. End of footnote number 3. The most fatalities attributed to a single shark series of incidents around Matawan, Spring Lake, New Jersey in 1926. Great white again. This time they netted the fish in Raritan Bay and found human parts in gastro. I know which parts and whose. In school I ended up writing these different papers on the castaway section of Moby Dick, the chapter in which a cabin boy falls overboard and is driven mad by the empty immensity of what he finds himself floating in. And when I teach school now, I always teach Stephen Crane's horrific The Open Boat, and I get bent out of shape when the kids think the story's dull or just a jaunty venture. I want them to suffer the same marrow-level dread of the oceanic I've always felt. The intuition of the sea is primordial nada, bottomless depths inhabited by tooth-studded things rising angelically toward you. The fixation came back with a long-repressed vengeance on my luxury cruise. Footnote number 4. I'll admit that on the very first night of the 7NC, I asked the staff of the Nadir's 5-star Clairville restaurant whether I could maybe have a spare bucket of au jus drippings from supper so that I could try chumming for sharks off the back rail of the top deck, and that this request struck everybody from the maitre d' on down as disturbing and maybe even disturbed, and that it turned out to be a serious journalistic faux pas, because I'm almost positive the maitre d' passed this disturbing tidbit on to Mr. Dermatitis, and that it was a big reason why I was denied access to places like the ship's galley, thereby impoverishing the sensuous scope of this article. It also revealed how little I understood the Nadir's sheer size. 12 decks up is 150 feet, and the au jus drippings would have dispersed into a vague red cologne by the time they hit the water, with concentrations of blood inadequate to attract or excite a serious shark, whose fin would have probably looked like a pushpin from that height anyway. End of footnote number 4. And I made such a fuss about the one possible dorsal fin I saw off starboard that my dinner companions at table 64 finally had to tell me, with all possible tact, to shut up about the fin already. I don't think it's an accident that 7NC luxury cruises appeal mostly to older people. I don't mean decrepitly old, but like 50-ish people for whom their own mortality is something more than an abstraction. Most of the exposed bodies to be seen all over the daytime Nadir were in various stages of disintegration, and the ocean itself turns out to be one enormous engine of decay. Seawater corrodes vessels with amazing speed, rusts them, exfoliates paint, strips varnish, dulls shine, coats ships' hulls with barnacles and kelp and a vague and ubiquitous nautical snot that seems like death incarnate. We saw some real horrors in port, local boats that looked as if they had been dipped in a mixture of acid and shit, scabbed with rust and crew, ravaged by what they flowed in. Not so the Megaline's ships. It's no accident they're white and clean, for they're clearly meant to represent the Calvinist triumph of capital and industry over the primal decay action of the sea. The Nadir seemed to have a whole battalion of wiry little third world guys who went around the ship in navy blue jumpsuits scanning for decay to overcome. Writer Frank Conroy, who has an odd little essay Marshall in the front of Celebrity Cruise's 7NC brochure, talks about how it became a private challenge for me to try to find a piece of dull, bright work, a chipped rail, a stain in the deck, a slack cable, or anything that wasn't perfectly shipshape. Eventually, toward the end of the trip, I found a capstan, a type of nautical hoist, like a pulley on steroids, with a $50 patch of rust on the side facing the sea. My delight in this tiny flaw was interrupted by the arrival, even as I stood there, of a crewman with a roller and a bucket of white paint. I watched as he gave the entire capstan a fresh coat and walked away with a nod. Here's the thing. A vacation is a respite from unpleasantness. And since consciousness of death and decay are unpleasant, it may seem weird that the ultimate American fantasy vacation involves being plunked down in an enormous primordial stew of death and decay. But on a 7NC luxury cruise, we are skillfully enabled in the construction of various fantasies of triumph over just this death and decay. One way to triumph is via the rigors of self-improvement. Diet, exercise, cosmetic surgery, Franklin Quest time management seminars, to which the crew's amphetaminic upkeep of the Nadir is an unstable analog. But there's another way out, too. Not titivation, but titillation. Not hard work, but hard play. See, in this regard, the 7NC's constant activities, festivities, gaiety, song, the adrenaline, the stimulation, it makes you feel vibrant, alive. It makes your existence seem non-contingent. Footnote number 5. The Nadir's got literally hundreds of cross-sectional maps of the ship on every deck, at every elevator and junction, each with a red dot and a U are here. It doesn't take long to figure out that these are less for orientation than for reassurance. End of footnote number 5. The hard play option promises not a transcendence of death dread so much as drowning it out, sharing a laugh with your friends. Footnote number 6. Constant references to friends in the brochure's text. Part of this promise to escape from dread is that no cruiser is ever alone. End of footnote number 6. In the lounge after dinner, you glance at your watch and mention that it's almost showtime. When the curtain comes down after a standing ovation, the talk among your companions turns to, what next? Perhaps a visit to the casino or a little dancing in the disco? Maybe a quiet drink in the piano bar or a starlit stroll around the deck? After discussing all of your options, everyone agrees, let's do it all. Dante this isn't, but Celebrity Cruises' brochure is an extremely powerful and ingenious piece of advertising. Luxury Megaline's brochures are always magazine size, heavy and glossy, beautifully laid out, their text offset by art quality photos of upscale couples. Footnote number 7. Always couples, and even in group shots it's always groups of couples. I never did get a hold of a brochure for an actual singles cruise, but the mind reels. There was a singles get-together Seek on the Nadir that first Saturday night held on Deck 8's Scorpio Disco, which after an hour of self-hypnosis and controlled breathing, I steeled myself to go to. But even the get-together was 3/4 established couples, and the few of us singles under like 70 all looked grim and self-hypnotized, and the whole affair seemed like a true wrist slitter, and I beat a retreat after half an hour because Jurassic Park was scheduled to run on the TV that night, and I hadn't yet looked at the whole schedule and seen that Jurassic Park would play several dozen times over the coming week. End of footnote number 7. Tanned faces and a kind of rictus of pleasure. Celebrity's brochure in particular is a real two-napkin drooler. It has little hypertextish offsets boxed in gold with bites like indulgence becomes easy and relaxation becomes second nature, and my favorite, stress becomes a faint memory. The text itself is positively Prozacian. Just standing at the ship's rail looking out to sea has a profoundly soothing effect. As you drift along like a cloud on the water, the weight of everyday life is magically lifted away, and you seem to be floating on a sea of smiles, not just among your fellow guests, but on the faces of the ship's staff as well. As a steward cheerfully delivers your drinks, you mention all of the smiles among the crew. He explains that every Celebrity staff member takes pleasure in making your cruise a completely carefree experience and treating you as an honored guest. Footnote number 8. The press liaison for Celebrity's PR firm, the charming and Deborah Winger-voiced Miss Wyson, has this bold explanation for the cheery service. The people on board, the staff, are really part of one big family. You probably noticed this when you were on the ship. They really love what they're doing, and love serving people, and they pay attention to what everybody wants and needs. This was not what I observed. What I observed was that the Nadir was one very tight ship, run by an elite cadre of very hard-assed Greek officers and supervisors, that the staff lived in mortal terror of these bosses, who watched them with enormous beadiness at all times, and that the crew worked almost Dickensianly hard, too hard to feel truly cheery about it. My sense was that the cheeriness was up there with celerity and servility on the clipboarded evaluation sheets the Greek bosses were constantly filling out on the crew. My sense was that a crewman could get fired for a pretty small lapse, and that getting fired by these Greek officers might well involve a spotlessly shined shoe in the ass and then a really long swim. End of footnote number 8. Besides, he adds, there's no place else they'd rather be. Looking back out to sea, you couldn't agree more. This is advertising, fantasy enablement, but with a queerly authoritarian twist. Note the imperative use of the second person and a specificity out of detail that extends even to what you will say. You will say, I couldn't agree more. And let's do it all. You are here, excused from even the work of constructing the fantasy, because the ads do it for you. And this near parental type of advertising makes a very special promise, a diabolically seductive promise that's actually kind of honest, because it's a promise that the luxury cruise itself is all about honoring. The promise is not that you can experience great pleasure, but that you will. They'll make certain of it. They'll micromanage every iota of every pleasure option so that not even the dreadful corrosive action of your adult consciousness and agency and dread can fuck up your fun. Your troublesome capacities for choice, error, regret, dissatisfaction, and despair will be removed from the equation. You will be able finally for once to relax, the ads promise, because you will have no choice. Your pleasure will, for 7 nights and 6.5 days, be wisely and efficiently managed. Aboard the Nadir, as is ringingly foretold in the brochure, you will get to do something you haven't done in a long, long time. Absolutely nothing. How long has it been since you did absolutely nothing? I know exactly how long it's been for me. I know how long it's been since I had every need met choicelessly from some place outside me, without my having to ask. And that time I was floating, too. And the fluid was warm and salty, and if I was in any way conscious, I'm sure I was dreadless, and I was having a really good time, and would have sent postcards to everyone wishing they were here. Boarding. A 7NC's pampering is maybe a little uneven at first, but it starts right at the airport where you don't have to go to baggage claim, because people from the mega line get your suitcases for you and take them straight to the ship. A bunch of other mega lines besides Celebrity Cruises operate out of Fort Lauderdale, and the flight down from O'Hare is full of festive-looking people dressed for cruising. It turns out that the retired couple sitting next to me on the plane is booked on the Nadir. This is their 4th luxury cruise in as many years. It is they who tell me about the news reports of the kid jumping overboard. The husband wears a fishing cap with a very long bill and a t-shirt that says Big Daddy. 7NC luxury cruises always start and finish on a Saturday. Imagine the day after the Berlin Wall came down if everybody in East Germany was plump and comfortable looking and dressed in Caribbean pastels, and you'll have a pretty good idea what the Fort Lauderdale Airport terminal looks like today. Near the back wall, a number of brisk-looking older ladies in vaguely naval outfits hold up printed signs. HLND, Celeb, CUND, CRN. You're supposed to find your particular megaline's brisk lady and coalesce around her as she herds a growing ectoplasm of Nadirites out to buses that will ferry you to the piers and what you chaotically believe will be immediate and hassle-free boarding. Apparently the airport is just your average sleepy mid-size airport 6 days a week, and then every Saturday resembles the fall of Saigon. Now we're riding to the piers in a column of 8 chartered Greyhounds. Our convoy's rate of speed and the odd deference shown by other traffic give the whole procession a vaguely funereal quality. Fort Lauderdale proper looks like one extremely large golf course, but the Megaline's piers are in something called Port Everglades, an industrial area zoned for blight, with warehouses and transformer parks and stacked boxcars and vacant lots. We pass a huge field of those hammer-shaped automatic oil derricks, all bobbing fallaciously. And on the horizon past them is a fingernail clipping of shiny sea. Whenever we go over bumps or train tracks, there's a huge mass clicking sound from all the cameras around everybody's neck. I haven't brought any sort of camera, and feel a perverse pride about this. The Nadir's traditional berth is Pier 21. Pier, although it conjures for me images of wharfs and cleats and lapping water, turns out here to denote something like what airport denotes, viz. A zone and not a thing. There's no real view of the ocean, no docks, no briny smell to the air, but as we enter the pier zone, there are a lot of really big white ships that blot out most of the sky. From inside, Pier 21 seems kind of like a blimpless blimp hangar, high-ceilinged and echoey. It has walls of unclean windows on 3 sides, at least 2,500 orange chairs in rows of 25, a kind of desultory snack bar, and restrooms with very long lines. The acoustics are brutal, and it's tremendously loud. Some of the people in the rows of chairs appear to have been here for days. They have the glazed and camped look of people at airports in blizzards. It's now 11:32 a.m., and boarding will not commence 1 second before 2 p.m. A PA announcement politely but firmly declares celebrities' seriousness about this. The PA lady's voice is what you imagine a British supermodel would sound like. Everyone clutches a numbered card like identity papers at Checkpoint Charlie. Pier 21's pre-boarding blimp hangar is not as bad as, say, New York City's Port Authority bus terminal at 5 p.m. on Friday, but it bears little resemblance to any of the stressless pamper venues detailed in the celebrity brochure, which I am not the only person in here thumbing through and looking at wistfully. A lot of people are now staring with subwayish blankness at other people. A kid whose t-shirt says Sandy Duncan's Eye. Footnote 9. Journalistic follow-up has revealed that this is the name of a band that I feel confident betting is punk. End of footnote number 9. Is carving something in the plastic of his chair. There are quite a few semi-old people traveling with really desperately old people who are clearly their parents. Men after a certain age simply should not wear shorts, I've decided. The skin seems denuded and practically crying out for hair, particularly on the calves. It's just about the only body area where you actually want more hair on older men. A couple of those glabrous calved guys are field stripping their camcorders with military expertise. There's also a fair number of couples in their 20s and 30s, with a honeymoonish aspect to the way their heads rest on each other's shoulders. Somewhere past the big grey doors, behind the restroom's roiling lines, is a kind of umbilical passage leading to what I assume is the actual nadir, which outside the hangar's windows presents as a tall wall of total white metal. The Chicago lady and Big Daddy are playing Uno with another couple, who turn out to be friends they'd made on a Princess Alaska cruise in '93. By this time I'm down to slacks and t-shirt and tie, and the tie looks like it's been washed and hand-wrung. Perspiring has lost its novelty. Celebrity Cruises seems to be reminding us that the real world we're leaving behind includes crowded public waiting areas with no AC and indifferent ventilation. Now it's 12:55 p.m. Although the brochure says the Nadir sails at 4:30 and that you can board anytime from 2 p.m. until then, it looks as if all 1,374 Nadir passengers are already here, plus a fair number of relatives and well-wishers. Every so often I sort of orbit the blimp hangar, eavesdropping, making small talk. The universal topic of discussion is, why are you here? Nobody uses the word pamper or luxury. The word that gets used over and over is relax. Everybody characterizes the upcoming week as either a long put-off reward or a last-ditch effort to salvage sanity and self from some inconceivable crockpot of pressure, or both. A lot of the explanatory narratives are long and involved, and some are sort of lurid, including a couple of people who have finally buried a terminal, hideously lingering relative they'd been nursing at home for months. Finally, we are called for boarding and moved in a columnar herd toward the passport check and Deck 3 gangway beyond. We are greeted, each of us, and escorted to our cabins by not one but two Aryan-looking hostesses from the hospitality staff. We are led over plush plum carpet to the interior of what one presumes is the actual Nadir, washed now in high oxygen AC that seems subtly balsam-scented, pausing, if we wish, to have our pre-cruise photo taken by the ship's photographer, apparently for some before and after souvenir ensemble Celebrity Cruises will try to sell us at the end of the week. My hostesses are Inga and Jelly, and they carry my book bag and suit coat, respectively. I start seeing the first of more watch your step signs that anyone could count. It turns out that a megaship's flooring is totally uneven, and everywhere there are sudden little steplets up and down. It's an endless walk, up, fore, aft, serpentine through bulkheads and steel-railed corridors, with mollified jazz coming out of the little round speakers in a beige enamel ceiling. At intervals on every wall are the previously mentioned cross-section maps and diagrams. Footnote number 10. Like all megaships, the Nadir has given each deck some 7NC related name rather than a number. And already, I am forgetting whether the fantasy deck is deck 7 or 8. Deck 12 is called the Sun Deck. 11 is the Marina deck and has a pool and cafe. 10 I forget. 9 is the Bahamas deck. 8 is fantasy and 7 is galaxy, or vice versa. And they contain all the venues for serious eating and dancing and casinoing and headline entertainment. 6 I never did get straight. 5 is the Europa deck and comprises the Nadir's corporate nerve center. A huge, high-ceilinged, bank-looking lobby with everything done in lemon and salmon and brass plating around the guest relations desk, and the purser's desk and the hotel manager's desk, with water running down massive pillars with a sound that all but drives you to the nearest urinal. 4 is cabins, everything below is all business and off limits. End of footnote number 10. The elevator is made of glass and is noiseless, and Inga and Jelly smile slightly and gaze at nothing as together we ascend. And it's a very close race as to which of the two smells better in the enclosed chill. Soon we are passing little teak-lined shipboard shops with Gucci, Waterford, Wedgwood, Rolex, and there's a crackle in the jazz and an announcement in 3 languages about welcome and willkommen, and how there will be a compulsory lifeboat drill an hour after sailing. By 3:15 p.m. I am installed in Nadir cabin 1009 and immediately eat almost a whole basket of free fruit and lie on a really nice bed and drum my fingers on my swollen tummy. Under sail. Our horn is genuinely planet-shattering. Departure at 4:30 turns out to be a not untasteful affair of crepe and horns. Each deck has walkways outside with railings made of really good wood. It's now overcast, and the ocean way below is dull and frothy. Docking and undocking are the 2 times the mega cruiser's captain actually steers the ship. Captain G. Panagiotakis has now wheeled us around and pointed our snout at the open sea, and we, large and white and clean, are under sail. The whole first 2 days and nights are bad weather, with high-pitched winds, heaving seas, spume lashing the porthole's glass. For 40-plus hours, it's more like a North Sea cruise, and the celebrity staff goes around looking regretful but not apologetic. And in all fairness, it's hard to find a way to blame Celebrity Cruises Inc. for the weather. The staff keeps urging us to enjoy the view from the railings on the lee side of the Nadir. The one other guy who joins me in trying out the non-lee side has his glasses blown off by the gale. I keep waiting to see somebody from the crew wearing the traditional yellow slicker, but no luck. The railing I do most of my contemplative gazing from is on deck 10, so the sea is way below, slopping and heaving around, so it's a little like looking down into a briskly flushing toilet. No fins in view. In heavy seas, hypochondriacs are kept busy, taking their gastric pulse every couple of seconds, and wondering whether what they're feeling is maybe the onset of seasickness. Seasickness-wise, though, it turns out that bad weather is sort of like battle. There's no way to know ahead of time how you'll react. A test of the deep and involuntary stuff of man. I myself turn out not to get seasick. For the whole first rough sea day, I puzzle over the fact that every other passenger on the MV Nadir looks to have received identical little weird shaving cuts below his or her left ear, which in the case of female passengers seems especially strange, until I learn that these little round band-aid-ish things on everybody's neck are special new super-powered transdermal motion sickness patches, which apparently nobody with any kind of clue about 7NC luxury cruising now leaves home without. A lot of the passengers get seasick anyway, these first 2 howling days. It turns out that a seasick person really does look green, though it's an odd and ghostly green, pasty and toadish, and more than a little corpse-like when the seasick person is dressed in formal dinner wear. For the first 2 nights, who's feeling seasick and who's not now but was a little while ago, or isn't feeling it yet but thinks it may be coming on, etc., is a big topic of conversation at table 64 in the 5-star Caravel restaurant. Footnote number 11. This is on deck 7, the serious dining room, and it's never called just the Caravel restaurant, and never just the restaurant. It's always the 5-star Caravel restaurant. End of footnote number 11. Discussing nausea and vomiting while eating intricately prepared gourmet foods doesn't seem to bother anybody. Common suffering and fear of suffering turn out to be a terrific icebreaker, and icebreaking is pretty important because on a 7NC you eat at the same designated table with the same companions all week. There are 7 other people with me at good old table 64, all from South Florida. Four know one another in private landlocked life and have requested to be at the same table. The other three people are an old couple and their granddaughter, whose name is Mona. I'm the only first-time luxury cruiser at table 64. With the conspicuous exception of Mona, I like all my table mates a lot. And I want to get a description of supper out of the way fast and avoid saying much about them for fear of hurting their feelings by noting any character defects or eccentricities that might seem potentially mean. Besides me, there are 5 women and 2 men, and both men are completely silent except on the subjects of golf, business, transdermal motion sickness prophylaxis, and the legalities of getting stuff through customs. The women carry table 64's conversational ball. One of the reasons I like all these women, except Mona, so much is that they laugh relatively hard at my jokes, even lame or very obscure jokes. Although they all have this very curious way of laughing where they sort of scream before they laugh, so that for one excruciating second you can't tell whether they're getting ready to laugh or whether they're seeing something hideous and scream-worthy over your shoulder. My favorite tablemate is Trudy, whose husband is back home managing some sudden crisis at the couple's cellular phone business and has given his ticket to Alice, their heavy and extremely well-dressed daughter, who is on spring break from Miami U, and who is for some reason very anxious to communicate to me that she has a serious boyfriend, whose name is apparently Patrick. Alice's continual assertion of her relationship status may be a defensive tactic against Trudy, who keeps pulling professionally retouched 4x5 glossies of Alice out of her purse and showing them to me, with Alice sitting right there, and who, every time Alice mentions Patrick, suffers some sort of weird facial tic or grimace where the canine tooth on one side of her face shows, but the other side doesn't. Trudy is 56 and looks, and I mean this in the nicest possible way, rather like Jackie Gleason in drag, and has a particularly loud pre-laugh scream that is a real arrhythmia producer, and is the one who coerces me into Wednesday night's conga line, and gets me strung out on snowball jackpot bingo. Trudy is also an incredible lay authority on 7&C luxury cruises, this being her 6th in a decade. She and her best friend Esther, thin-faced, subtly ravaged-looking, the distaff part of the couple from Miami, have tales to tell about Carnival, Princess, Crystal, and Cunard, too fraught with liable potential to reproduce here. By midweek it starts to strike me that I have never before been party to such a minute and exacting analysis of the food and service of a meal I am just at the moment eating. Nothing escapes the attention of T&E. The symmetry of the parsley sprigs atop the boiled baby carrots, the consistency of the bread, the flavor and mastication friendliness of various cuts of meat, the celerity and flambe technique of the various pastry guys in tall white hats who appear tableside when items have to be set on fire. A major percentage of the desserts in the 5-star Caravel restaurant have to be set on fire, and so on. The waiter and busboy keep circling the table, going, "Finish? Finish?" While Esther and Trudy have exchanges like, "Honey, you don't look happy with the potatoes. What's the problem?" "I'm fine. It's fine. Everything's fine." "Don't lie. Honey, with that face, who could lie?" "Frank, am I right?" This is a person with a face incapable of lying. "There's nothing wrong, Esther darling. I swear it." "You're not happy with the conch." "All right. I've got a problem with the conch. Did I tell you?" "Frank, did I tell her?" Frank silently probes his ear with pinky. "Was I right?" "Trudy, I could tell just by looking you weren't happy." "I'm fine with the potatoes. It's the conch." "Did I tell you about seasonal fish on ships?" "What did I tell you?" "The potatoes are good." Mona is 18. Her grandparents have been taking her on a luxury cruise every spring since she was 5. Mona always sleeps through both breakfast and lunch and spends all night at the Scorpio Disco and in the Mayfair Casino playing the slots. She is 6'2" if she's an inch. She's going to attend Penn State next fall because the agreement is that she'll receive a 4-wheel drive vehicle if she goes someplace where there might be snow. She's unabashed in recounting the college selection criteria. She's an incredibly demanding passenger and diner, but her complaints about slight aesthetic and gustatory imperfections at table lack Trudy and Esther's discernment and come off as simply churlish. Mona is also kind of strange looking. A body like Bridget Nielsen or some centerfold on steroids, and above it, framed in resplendent blonde hair, the tiny unhappy face of a kind of corrupt doll. Her grandparents, who retire every night after supper, always make a small ceremony after dessert of handing Mona $100 to go have some fun with. This $100 bill is always in one of those little ceremonial bank envelopes that has Franklin's face staring out of a porthole-like window in the front. And written on the envelope in red magic marker is always, "We love you, honey." Mona never once says thank you. She also rolls her eyes at just about everything her grandparents say, a habit that very quickly drives me up the wall. Mona's special customary gig on 7NC luxury cruises is to lie to the waiter and maitre d' and say that Thursday is her birthday, so that at the formal supper on Thursday, she gets bunting and a heart-shaped helium balloon tied to her chair, and her own cake, and pretty much the whole restaurant staff comes out and forms a circle around her and sings to her. Her real birthday, she informs me on Monday, is July 29th, and when I quietly observe that July 29th is also the birthday of Benito Mussolini, Mona's grandmother shoots me kind of a death look. Although Mona herself is excited at the coincidence, apparently confusing the names Mussolini and Maserati. The weather in no way compromised the refinement of meals at Table 64. Even in heavy seas, 7NC megaships don't yaw or throw you around, or send bowls of soup sliding across tables. Only a certain slight unreality to your footing lets you know you're not on land. At sea, a room's floor feels somehow 3D, and your footing demands a slight attention that good old static land never needs. You don't ever quite hear the ship's big engines, but when your feet are planted you can feel them, a kind of spinal throb, oddly soothing. Walking is a little dreamy also. There are constant slight shifts in torque from the wave's action. When heavy waves come straight at a megaship's snout, the ship goes up and down along its long axis. This is called pitching. It produces the disorienting sensation that you're walking on a very slight downhill grade, and then level, and then on a very slight uphill grade. Some evolutionarily retrograde reptile brain part of the central nervous system is apparently reawakened, though, and manages all this so automatically that it requires a good deal of attention to notice anything more than that walking feels a little dreamy. Rolling, on the other hand, is when waves hit the ship from the side and make it go up and down along its crosswise axis. When the nadir rolls, what you feel is a very slight increase in the demands placed on the muscles of your left leg, then a strange absence of all demand, then extra demands on the right leg. We never pitch badly, but every once in a while some really big Poseidon Adventure grade wave must have come and hit the nadir's side, because the asymmetric leg demands sometimes won't stop or reverse, and you keep having to put more and more weight on one leg until you're exquisitely close to tipping over. The cruise's first night, steaming southeast for Jamaica, features some really big waves from starboard, and in the casino after supper, it's hard to tell who's had too much of the 71 Riechborg and who's just doing a roll-related stagger. Add in the fact that most of the women are wearing high heels, and you can imagine some of the vertiginous, staggering, flailing clutching that goes on. Almost everyone on the nadir has come in couples, and when they walk during heavy seas, they tend to hang onto each other like freshman steadies. You can tell they like it. The women have this trick of sort of folding themselves into the men and stuggling as they walk, and the men's postures improve and their faces firm up, and they seem to feel unusually solid and protective. It's easy to see why older couples like to cruise. Heavy seas are also great for sleep, it turns out. The first 2 mornings, there's hardly anybody at early seating breakfast. Everybody sleeps in. People with insomnia of years standing report uninterrupted sleep of 9, 10, even 11 hours. Their eyes are childlike and wide with wonder as they report this. Everyone looks younger when they've had a lot of sleep. There's rampant daytime napping too. By the end of the week, when we've had all manner of weather, I finally see what it is about heavy seas and marvelous rest. In heavy seas, you feel rocked to sleep. The windows spume a gentle shushing. Engines throb a mother's pulse. The 4-color brochure, Part 2. Did I mention that famous writer and Iowa Writers Workshop chairperson Frank Conroy has his own experiential essay about cruising right there in Celebrity's 7NC brochure? Well, he does. And the thing starts out on the Pier 21 gangway that first Saturday with his family. Footnote number 12. Conroy took the same celebrity cruise as I, the 7-night Western Caribbean on the good old Nadir, in May 1994. He and his family cruised for free. I know details like this because Conroy talked to me on the phone and answered nosy questions, and was frank and forthcoming and in general just totally decent about the whole thing. End of footnote number 12. With that single, easy step, we entered a new world, a sort of alternate reality to the one on shore. Smiles, handshakes, and we were whisked away to our cabin by a friendly young woman from guest relations. Then they're outside along the rail for the Nadir's sailing. We became aware that the ship was pulling away. We had felt no warning, no trembling of the deck, throbbing of the engines or the like. It was as if the land were magically receding, like some ever so slow reverse zoom in the movies. This is pretty much what Conroy's whole My Celebrity Cruise, or All This and a Tan Too, is like. Its full implications don't hit me until I reread it supine on deck 12 the first sunny day. Conroy's essay is graceful and lapidary and persuasive. I submit that it is also completely insidious and bad. Its badness does not consist so much in its constant and mesmeric references to fantasy and alternate realities and the palliative powers of professional pampering. I'd come on board after 2 months of intense and moderately stressful work, but now it seemed a distant memory. I realized it had been a week since I'd washed a dish, cooked a meal, gone to the market, done an errand, or, in fact, anything at all requiring a minimum of thought and effort. My toughest decisions had been whether to catch the afternoon showing of Miss Doubtfire or play bingo. Nor in the surfeit of happy adjectives and the ton of breathless approval throughout. Bright sun, warm still air, the brilliant blue-green of the Caribbean under the vast lapis lazuli dome of the sky. For all of us, our fantasies and expectations were to be exceeded, to say the least. When it comes to service, Celebrity Cruises seems ready and able to deal with anything. Rather, part of the essay's real badness can be found in the way it reveals once again the Megaline's sail-to-sail agenda of micromanaging not only one's perceptions of a 7NC, but even one's own interpretation and articulation of those perceptions. In other words, Celebrity's PR people go and get a respected writer to pre-articulate and endorse the 7NC experience, and to do it with a professional eloquence and authority that few lay perceivers and articulators could hope to equal. Footnote number 13. E.g., after reading Conroy's essay on board, whenever I'd look up at the sky, it wouldn't be the sky I was seeing, it was the vast lapis lazuli dome of the sky. End of footnote number 13. But the really major badness is that the project and placement of My Celebrity Cruise are sneaky and duplicitous and well beyond whatever eroded pales still exist in terms of literary ethics. Conroy's essay appears as an inset on skinnier pages and with different margins than the rest of the brochure, creating the impression that it has been excerpted from some large and objective thing Conroy wrote. But it hasn't been. The truth is that Celebrity Cruises paid Frank Conroy up front to write it. Footnote number 14. Phone inquiries about the origins of Professor Conroy's essay Merschel yielded two separate explanations. One, from Celebrity Cruises PR liaison Miss Wyson, after a 2-day silence that I've come to understand as the PR equivalent of covering the microphone with your hand and leaning over to confer with counsel. Celebrity saw an article he wrote in Travel and Leisure magazine, and they were really impressed with how he could create these mental postcards. So they went to ask him to write about his cruise experience for people who'd never been on a cruise before. And they did pay him to write the article, and they really took a gamble, really, because they had to pay him whether he liked it or not, and whether they liked the article or not. But, dry little chuckle, obviously they liked the article, and he did a good job. So that's the Mr. Conroy story, and those are his perspectives on his experience. 2, from Frank Conroy, with the small sigh that precedes a certain kind of weary candor. I prostituted myself. End of footnote number 14. Even though nowhere in or around the essay is there anything acknowledging that it's a paid endorsement, not even one of the little so-and-so has been compensated for his services that flashes at your TV screen's lower right during celebrity-hosted infomercials. Instead, inset on this weird essay commercial's first page is a photo of Conroy brooding in a black turtleneck, and below the photo, an author bio with a list of Conroy's books that includes the 1967 classic Stop Time, which is arguably the best literary memoir of the 20th century, and is one of the books that first made poor old humble yours truly want to try to be a writer. In the case of Frank Conroy's essay, Celebrity Cruises is trying to position an ad in such a way that we come to it with the lowered guard and leading chin we reserve for coming to an essay, for something that is art, or that is at least trying to be art. An ad that pretends to be art is, at absolute best, like somebody who smiles at you only because he wants something from you. This is dishonest, but what's insidious is the cumulative effect that such dishonesty has on us, since it offers a perfect simulacrum of goodwill without goodwill's real substance. It messes with our heads and eventually starts upping our defenses, even in cases of genuine smiles and real heart and true goodwill. It makes us feel confused and lonely and impotent and angry and scared. It causes despair. Footnote number 15. This is related to the phenomenon of the professional smile, a pandemic in the service industry, and no place in my experience have I been on the receiving end of as many professional smiles as I was on the Nadir. Maitre d's, chef stewards, hotel managers' minions, cruise director. Their PSs all come on like switches at my approach. But also back on land, at banks, restaurants, airline ticket counters, and on and on. You know this smile, the one that doesn't quite reach the smiler's eyes and signifies nothing more than a calculated attempt to advance the smiler's own interests by pretending to like the smiley. Why do employers and supervisors force professional service people to broadcast the professional smile? Am I the only person who's sure that the growing number of cases in which normal-looking people open up with automatic weapons in shopping malls and insurance offices and medical complexes is somehow causally related to the fact that these venues are well-known dissemination loci of the professional smile? End of footnote number 15. But for this particular 7NC consumer, Conroy's ad as essay ends up having a truthfulness about it that I'm sure is unintentional. As my week on the Nadir wears on, I begin to see this essay commercial as a perfectly ironic reflection of the mass market cruise experience itself. The essay is polished, powerful, impressive, clearly the best that money can buy. It presents itself as being for my benefit. It manages my experiences and my interpretation of those experiences and takes care of them for me in advance. It seems to care about me, but it doesn't, not really. Because first and foremost, it wants something from me. So does the cruise itself. The pretty setting and glittering ship and sedulous staff and solicitous fund managers all want something from me, and it's not just the price of my ticket. They've already got that. Just what it is that they want is hard to pin down, but by early in the week I can feel it building. It circles the ship like a fin. Pampered to Death, Part 2. Celebrity's brochure does not lie or exaggerate, however, in the luxury department. And I now confront the journalistic problem of not being sure how many examples I need to list in order to communicate the atmosphere of sybaritic and nearly insanity-producing pampering on board the MV Nadir. Take, as one example, the moment right after sailing when I want to go out to Deck 10's port rail for some introductory vista gazing and thus decide I need some zinc oxide for my peel-prone nose. My zinc oxide's still in my big duffel bag, which at that point is piled with all of Deck 10's other luggage in the little area between the 10-4 elevator and the 10-4 staircase, while little guys in cadet blue celebrity jumpsuits, porters, entirely Lebanese it seems, are cross-checking the luggage tags with the Nadir's passenger list and lugging everything to people's cabins. So I come out and spot my duffel among the luggage, and I start to grab and haul it out of the towering pile of leather and nylon, thinking I'll just whisk the bag back to cabin 1009 myself and root through it and find my zinc oxide. One of the porters sees me starting to grab the bag, though, and he dumps all 4 of the massive pieces of luggage he's staggering with and leaps to intercept me. At first I'm afraid he thinks I'm some kind of baggage thief and wants to see my claim check or something. But it turns out that what he wants is my duffel. He wants to carry it to 1009 for me. And I, whom about half again this poor little herniated guy's size, as is the duffel bag itself, protest politely, trying to be considerate, saying don't fret, not a big deal, just need my good old zinc oxide. I'll just get the big old heavy weather-stained sucker out of here myself. And now a very strange argument ensues. Me versus the Lebanese porter, because I now understand I'm putting this guy, who barely speaks English, in a terrible kind of sedulous service double bind, a paradox of pampering. The passenger's always right versus never let a passenger carry his own baggage. Clueless at the time about what this poor man is going through, I wave off both his high-pitched protests and his agonized expression as mere servile courtesy, and I extract the duffel and lug it up the hall to 1009, and slather the old beak with zinc oxide and go outside to watch Florida recede cinematically a la F. Conroy. Only later do I understand what I've done. Only later do I learn that that little Lebanese Deck 10 porter had his head just about chewed off by the also Lebanese Deck 10 head porter, who had his own head chewed off by the Austrian chief steward, who received confirmed reports that a passenger had been seen carrying his own bag up to the port hallway of Deck 10, and now demanded a rolling Lebanese head for this clear indication of porterly dereliction, and the Austrian chief steward had reported the incident to a ship's officer in the guest relations department, a Greek guy with Revo shades and a walkie-talkie, and epaulettes so complex I never did figure out what his rank was. And this high-ranking Greek guy actually came around to 1009 after Saturday's supper to apologize on behalf of practically the entire Chandri shipping line, and to assure me that ragged-necked Lebanese heads were even at that moment rolling down various corridors in piacular recompense for my having had to carry my own bag. And even though this Greek officer's English was in lots of ways better than mine, it took me no less than 10 minutes to detail the double bind I'd put the porter in, brandishing at relevant moments the actual tube of zinc oxide that had caused the whole snafu. 10 or more minutes before I could get enough of a promise from the Greek officer that various chewed-off heads would be reattached and employee records unbesmirched to feel comfortable enough to allow the officer to leave. Footnote number 16. In further retrospect, I think the only thing I really persuaded this Greek officer of was that I was very weird and possibly unstable, which impression I'm sure was shared with Mr. Dermatitis and combined with that same first night's au jus as shark bait request to destroy my credibility with Dermatitis before I even got in to see him. End of footnote number 16. And the whole incident was incredibly frazzling and despair-fraught, and filled almost half a spiral notebook, and is here recounted in only its barest psychoskeletal outline. This grim determination to indulge the passenger in ways that go far beyond any halfway sane passenger's own expectations is everywhere on the Nadir. Some wholly random examples. My cabin bathroom has plenty of thick, fluffy towels, but when I go up to lie in the sun, I don't have to take any of my cabin's towels, because the two upper deck sun areas have big carts loaded with even thicker and fluffier towels. These carts are stationed at convenient intervals along endless rows of gymnastically adjustable deck chairs that are themselves phenomenally fine deck chairs, sturdy enough for even the portliest sunbather, but also narcoleptically comfortable, with heavy alloy frames over which is stretched some mysterious material that combines canvas's quick-drying durability with cotton's absorbency and comfort. Certainly a welcome step up from public pool's deck chair material of Kmartish plastic that sticks to your skin and produces farty suction noises whenever you shift your sweaty weight on it. And each of the sun decks is manned by a special squad of full-time towel guys, so that when you're done on both sides and ready to quit, and you spring easily out of the deck chair, you don't have to pick up your towel and take it with you, or even bust it into the cart's used towel slot, because a towel guy materializes the minute your fanny leaves the chair and removes your towel for you and deposits it in the slot. Actually, the towel guys are such overachievers that even if you get up for just a second to reapply zinc oxide or gaze contemplatively out over the railing at the sea, when you turn back around, your towel's often gone and your deck chair has been refolded to its uniform 45-degree at-rest angle, and you have to readjust your chair all over again and go to the cart to get a fresh fluffy towel, of which there's admittedly not a short supply. Down in the 5-star Caravel restaurant, the waiter, footnote 17, table 64's waiter is Tibor, a Hungarian and a truly exceptional person, about whom if there's any editorial justice, you will learn a lot more someplace below. End of footnote number 17. Will not only bring you a lobster, as well as a second and even a third lobster. Footnote number 18. Not until Tuesday's lobster night at the 5-star CR did I really empathetically understand the Roman phenomenon of the vomitorium. End of footnote number 18. With methamphetaminic speed will also incline over you with gleaming claw cracker and surgical fork and dismantle it for you, sparing you the green goopy work that's the only remotely rigorous thing about lobster. And at the Windsurf Cafe, up on deck 11 by the pools, where there's always an informal buffet lunch, there's never that bovine line that makes most cafeterias such a downer, and there are about 73 varieties of entree alone, and the sort of coffee you marry somebody for being able to make. And if you have too many things on your tray, a waiter will materialize as you peel away from the buffet and will carry your tray. Even though it's a cafeteria, there are all these waiters standing around with Nehru jackets and white towels draped over left arms, watching you. Not quite making eye contact, but scanning for any little way to be of service. Plus, plum-jacketed sommeliers walking around to see if you need a non-buffet libation. Plus, a whole other crew of maitre d's and supervisors watching the waiters and sommeliers and tall-hatted buffet servers to make sure you don't do something for yourself that could be done for you. Every public surface on the MV Nadir that isn't stainless steel or glass, or varnished parquet, or dense and good-smelling sonotype wood is plush blue carpet that never has a chance to accumulate even one flecklet of lint because jumpsuited third-world guys are always at it with Siemens AG vacuums. The elevators are Euroglass and yellow steel and stainless steel and a kind of wood grain material that looks too shiny to be real wood but makes a sound when you thump it that's an awful lot like real wood. Footnote number 19. The many things on the Nadir that were wood grain but not real wood were such wonderful and painstaking imitations of wood that a lot of times it seemed like it would have been simpler and less expensive simply to have used real wood. End of footnote number 19. The elevators and stairways between decks seem to be the particular objects of the anal retention of a whole special elevator and staircase custodial crew. During the first 2 days of rough seas, when people vomited a lot, especially after supper and apparently extra especially on the elevators and the stairways, these puddles of vomit inspired a veritable feeding frenzy of wet dry vacs and spot remover and all trace of odor eradicator chemicals applied by this elite special forces type crew. And don't let me forget room service, which on a 7NC luxury cruise is called cabin service. Cabin service is in addition to the 11 scheduled daily opportunities for public eating, and it's available 24 hours a day and is free. All you have to do is hit X72 on the bedside phone, and 10 or 15 minutes later, a guy who wouldn't even dream of hitting you up for a gratuity appears with thinly sliced ham and Swiss cheese on white bread with Dijon mustard, or the combo, Cajun chicken with pasta salad and spicy salsa, or a whole page of other sandwiches and platters from the services directory. And the stuff deserves to be capitalized, believe me. As a kind of semi-agoraphobe who spends massive amounts of time in my cabin, I come to have a really complex dependency/shame relationship with cabin service. Since finally finding out about it Monday, I've ended up availing myself of cabin service every night. More like twice a night. To be honest, even though I find it extremely embarrassing to be calling up X72 asking to have even more rich food brought to me when there have already been 11 gourmet eating ops that day. Footnote number 20. This is counting the midnight buffet, which tends to be a kind of lamely lavish, costume partyish thing with themed related foods, Oriental, Caribbean, Tex-Mex, in which I plan to mostly skip except to say that Tex-Mex night out by the pools featured what must have been a 7-foot-high ice sculpture of Pancho Villa that spent the whole party dripping steadily onto the mammoth sombrero of Tibor, whose waiter's contract forces him on Tex-Mex night to wear a serape and a straw sombrero with a 17-inch radius. He let me measure it when the reptilian maitre d' wasn't looking, and to dispense 4-alarm chili from a steam table placed right underneath an ice sculpture, and whose face on occasions like this expresses a combination of mortification and dignity that seems somehow to sum up the whole plight of post-war Eastern Europe. End of footnote number 20. Usually what I do is spread my notebooks and fieldings guide to Worldview Cruises 1995 and pens and various materials out all over the bed so that when the cabin service guy appears at the door, he'll see all this belletristic material and figure I'm working really hard on something belletristic right here in the cabin and have doubtless been too busy to have hit all the public meals, and thus I'm legitimately entitled to the indulgence of even more rich food. My experience with the cabin cleaning, though, is perhaps the ultimate example of pampering stress. The fact of the matter is that I rarely even see 1009's cabin steward, Petra, which is why, on the occasions when I do see her, I practically hold her prisoner and yammer at her like an idiot. But I have good reason to believe she sees me, because every time I leave 1009 for more than like half an hour, when I get back it's cleaned and dusted again, and the towels replaced, and the bathroom agleam. Don't get me wrong, in a way it's great. I'm in cabin 1009 a lot, and I also come and go a lot, and when I'm in here I sit in bed and write in bed while eating fruit and generally mess up the bed. But whenever I dart out and then come back, the bed is freshly made up and hospital cornered, and there's another mint-scented chocolate on the pillow. I grant that mysterious, invisible room cleaning is every slob's fantasy, like having a mom without the guilt. But there is also a creeping uneasiness about it that presents, at least in my own case, as a kind of paranoia. Because after a couple of days of this fabulous invisible room cleaning, I start to wonder how exactly Petra knows when I'm in 1009 and when I'm not. It's now that it occurs to me that I hardly ever see her. For a while I try experiments, like all of a sudden darting out in the 10-port hallway to see if I can catch Petra hunched over somewhere, keeping track of who is decabining. And I scour the whole hallway and ceiling area for evidence of some kind of camera monitoring movements outside the cabin doors. Zilch on both fronts. But then I see that the mystery is even more complex and unsettling than I'd first thought, because my cabin gets cleaned always and only during intervals when I'm gone for more than half an hour. When I go out, how can Petra or her supervisors possibly know how long I'm going to be gone? I try leaving 1009 a couple of times, and then dashing back after 10 or 15 minutes to see whether I can catch Petra in delicti, but she's never there. I try making an ungodly mess, then leaving and hiding somewhere on a lower deck, then dashing back after exactly 29 minutes. Again, when I come bursting through the door, there's no Petra and no cleaning. Then I leave the cabin with exactly the same expression and appurtenances as before, and this time stay hidden for 31 minutes, and then haul ass back. Again, no sighting of Petra, but now 1009 is sterilized and gleaming, and there's a mint on the pillow's new case. I scrutinize every inch of every surface I pass as I circle the deck during these little experiments. No cameras or motion sensors or anything in evidence anywhere that would explain how they know. Footnote number 21. The answer to why I don't just ask Petra how she does it is that Petra's English is extremely limited and primitive. And in sad fact, I'm afraid my whole deep feeling of attraction to Petra the Slavonian steward has been erected on the flimsy foundation of the only two English clauses she seems to know, one or the other of which she uses in response to every question, joke, or protestation of undying love. Is no problem, and you are a funny thing. End of footnote number 21. So for a while I theorized that somehow a special crewman is assigned to each passenger and follows that passenger at all times, using extremely sophisticated personal surveillance techniques and reporting back to Steward HQ my movements and activities and projected time of cabin return. For about a day I tried taking evasive actions, whirling to check behind me, popping around corners, darting in and out of gift shops via different doors, etc., but I never see one flaming sign of anybody engaged in surveillance. By the time I quit trying, I'm feeling half crazed, and my counter-surveillance measures are drawing frightened looks and even some temple tapping from 10-port's other guests. My cabin. I, who am not a true agoraphobe, but am what might be called a borderline agoraphobe or semi-agoraphobe, come therefore understandably to love very deeply cabin 1009/exterior port. Footnote number 22. 1009 indicates that it's the 9th cabin on deck 10. Port refers to the side of the ship it's on, and exterior means that I have a window. There are also interior cabins off the inner sides of the deck halls. But I hereby advise any prospective 7NC passenger with claustrophobic tendencies to make sure and specify exterior when making cabin reservations. End of footnote number 22. It is made of a fawn-colored enamelish polymer, and its walls are extremely thick and solid. I can drum annoyingly on the wall above my bed for up to 5 minutes before my aft neighbors pound very faintly back. My cabin is 13 size 11 keds long by 12 keds wide. The cabin door has 3 separate locking technologies and trilingual lifeboat and jacket instructions bolted to its wall, and a whole deck of multilingual do not disturb cards hanging from the inside knob. Right by the door is the Wonder Closet, a complicated honeycomb of shelves and drawers and hangers and cubby holes, and a personal fireproof safe. The Wonder Closet is so intricate in its utilization of every available cubic centimeter that all I can say is that it must have been designed by a very organized person indeed. Inside are extra chamois blankets and hypoallergenic pillows and plastic Celebrity Cruises bags of all different sizes and configurations for your laundry, optional dry cleaning, etc. The cabin's porthole is indeed round, but it is not small, and in terms of its importance to the room's mood and raison, it resembles a cathedral's rose window. It's made of that kind of very thick glass that tellers at drive-up banks stand behind. You can thump the glass with your fist, and it won't even vibrate. Every morning at exactly 11:34 a.m., a Filipino guy in a blue jumpsuit stands on one of the lifeboats that hang in rows between decks 9 and 10 and sprays my porthole with a hose to get the salt off, which is always fun to watch. Cabin 1009's dimensions are just barely on the good side of the line between very, very snug and cramped. Packed into its near square are a big good bed and 2 bedside tables with lamps and an 18-inch TV with 5-star at-sea cable options. There's also a white enameled desk that doubles as a vanity, and a round glass table on which sits a basket that's alternately filled with fresh fruit and husks and rinds of same. Every time I leave the cabin for more than the Rexwood half hour, I come back to find a new basket of fruit, covered in snug blue-tinted plastic wrap, on the glass table. It's good fresh fruit, and it's always there. I've never eaten so much fruit in my life. My bathroom. Cabin 1009's bathroom deserves extravagant praise. I've seen more than my share of bathrooms, and this is one bitchingly nice bathroom. It is 5.5 keds to the edge of the shower step up in sign to watch your step. The room is done in white enamel and gleaming stylized brushed and stainless steel. Its overhead lighting is some kind of blue intensive Eurofluorescence that's run through a diffusion filter so that it's diagnostically acute without being brutal. Next to the light switch is an Olisco Scirocco hairdryer that's brazed right onto the wall and comes on automatically when you take it out of the mount. The Scirocco's high setting just about takes your head off. The sink is huge, and its bowl is deep without seeming precipitous or ungentle of grade. Good plate mirror covers the whole wall over the sink. The steel soap dish is striated to let sog water out and minimize that annoying underside of the bar slime. The ingenious consideration of the anti-slime soap dish is particularly affecting. Keep in mind that 1009 is a mid-price single cabin. The mind positively reels at what a luxury penthouse-type cabin's bathroom must be like. Merely enter 1009's bathroom and hit the overhead lights, and on comes an automatic exhaust fan whose force and aerodynamism give steam or offensive odors just no quarter at all. Footnote 23. 1009's bathroom always smells of a strange but not unnice Norwegian disinfectant. The cabin itself, on the other hand, after it's been cleaned, has no odor. None. Not in the carpets, the bedding, the insides of the deck drawers, the wood of the Wonder Closet doors, nothing. This, too, eventually starts giving me the creeps. End of footnote number 23. The fan suction is such that if you stand right underneath its louvered vent, it makes your hair stand straight up on your head, which together with the abundantly rippling action of the Scirocco hairdryer, makes for hours of fun in the lavishly lit mirror. The shower itself overachieves in a very big way. The hot settings water is exfoliatingly hot, but it takes only one preset manipulation of the shower knob to get perfect 98.6 degree water. My own personal home should have such water pressure, The shower head's force pins you helplessly to the stall's opposite wall, and the head's massage setting makes your eyes roll up and your sphincter just about give. Footnote number 24. This detachable and concussive shower head can allegedly also be employed for non-hygienic and even prurient purposes. I overheard guys from a small University of Texas vacation contingent, the only college-age group on the whole Nadir, regale one another with tales of their ingenuity with the shower head. One guy in particular was fixated on the idea that somehow the shower's technology could be rigged to administer fellatio if he could just get access to a metric ratchet set. Your guess here is as good as mine. End of footnote number 24. The shower head and its flexible steel line are also detachable, so you can hold the head and direct its punishing stream just at your particularly dirty right knee, or something. But all this is still small potatoes compared with 1009's fascinating and potentially malevolent toilet. A harmonious concordance of elegant form and vigorous function, flanked by rolls of tissue so soft as to be without perforates for tearing. My toilet has above it this sign: "This toilet is connected to a vacuum sewage system. Please do not throw into the toilet anything, than ordinary waste and toilet paper." The toilet's flush produces a brief but traumatizing sound, a kind of held high B gargle, as of some gastric disturbance on a cosmic scale. Along with this sound comes a suction so awesomely powerful that it's both scary and strangely comforting. Your waste seems less removed than hurled from you, and with velocity that lets you feel as though the waste is going to end up someplace so far away that it will become an abstraction, a kind of existential sewage treatment system. Footnote number 25. The Nadir's vacuum sewage system begins after a while to hold such a fascination for me that I end up going hat in hand back to hotel manager Dermatitis to ask once again for access to the ship's nether parts. But once again I pull a boner with Dermatitis. I innocently mention my specific fascination with the ship's vacuum sewage system, which boner is consequent to another and prior boner by which I had failed to discover in my pre-boarding research that there had been, just a few months before this, a tremendous scandal in which a megaship had been discovered dumping waste over the side in mid-voyage, in violation of numerous national and maritime codes, and had been videotaped doing this by a couple of passengers who subsequently apparently sold the videotape to some network news magazine, and so the whole mega cruise industry was in a state of almost Nixonian paranoia about unscrupulous journalists trying to manufacture scandals about megaships' handling of waste. Even behind his mirrored sunglasses I can tell that Mr. Dermatitis is severely upset about my interest in sewage, and he denies my request to eyeball the VSS with a complex defensiveness that I can't even begin to chart out here. It is only later that night at supper, at good old table 64 in the 5-star CR, that my crew-savvy tablemates fill me in on the waste scandal, and they scream with mirth at the clay-footed naivete with which I'd gone to Dermatitis with what was in fact an innocent if puerile fascination with hermetically evacuated waste. And such is my own embarrassment and hatred of Mr. Dermatitis by this time that I begin to feel that if the hotel manager really does think I'm some kind of investigative journalist with a hard-on for shark dangers and sewage scandals, then he might think it would be worth the risk to have me harmed in some way. And, through a set of neurotic connections I won't even try to defend, I, for about a day and a half, begin to fear that the Nadir's Greek episcopate will somehow contrive to use the incredibly potent and forceful 1009 toilet itself for the assassination, that they'll, somehow lubricate the bowl and up the suction to where not just my waste, but I myself will be sucked down through the seat's opening and hurled into some kind of abstract septic exile. End of footnote number 25. The ocean. Traveling at sea for the first time is a chance to realize that the ocean is not one ocean. The water changes. The Atlantic that seethes off the eastern United States is glaucous and lightless and looks mean. Around Jamaica, though, it's more like a milky aquamarine. Off the Cayman Islands it's an electric blue, and off Cozumel it's almost purple. Same deal with the beaches. You can tell right away that South Florida's sand comes from rocks. It hurts your bare feet and has some sort of mineralish glitter to it. But Ocho Rios' beach is more like dirty sugar, and Cozumel's is like clean sugar, and at places along the coast of Grand Cayman, the sand's texture is more like flour, silicate. Its white is dreamy and vaporous as clouds white. The only real constant to the nautical topography of the Nadir's Caribbean is its unreal and almost retouched looking prettiness. It's impossible to describe right. The closest I can come is to say that it all looks expensive. Table 64's waiter. Our waiter's name is, as previously mentioned, Tibor. Mentally I refer to him as the tipster, but never out loud. Tibor has dismantled my artichokes and my lobsters, and taught me that extra well done is not the only way meat can be palatable. We have sort of bonded, I feel. He is 35 and about 5'4" and plump, and his movements have the bird-like economy characteristic of small, plump, graceful men. His face is at once round and pointy, and rosy. His tux never wrinkles. His hands are soft and pink. Menu-wise, Tibor advises and recommends, but without the hauteur that has always made me hate the gastropedantic waiters in classy restaurants. He is omnipresent without being unctuous or oppressive. He is kind and warm and fun. He is the head waiter for tables 64 to 67 at all 3 meals. He can carry 3 trays without precariousness and never looks harried or on the edge the way most mulletable waiters look. He seems like he cares. Tibor's cuteness is being compared by the women at table 64 to that of a button, but I have learned not to let his cuteness fool me. Tibor is a pro. His commitment to personally instantiating the Nadir's fanatical commitment to excellence is the one thing about which he shows no sense of humor. If you fuck with him in this area, he will feel pain and will make no effort to conceal it. On the second night at supper, for example, Tibor was circling the table and asking each of us how our entree was, and we all regarded this as just one of those perfunctory waiter questions and perfunctorily smiled back and said, "Fine, fine." And Tibor finally stopped and looked down at us all with a pained expression and changed his timbre slightly, so that it was clear he was addressing the whole table. Quote, "Please, I ask each, is excellent? Please. If excellent, you say, and I am happy. If not excellent, please, do not say excellent. Let me fix. Please." End quote. There was no hauteur or pedantry or even anger as he addressed us. He just meant what he said. His expression was babe naked, and we heard him, and nothing was perfunctory again. Mornings. The tipster wears a red bow tie and smells faintly of sandalwood. Early seating breakfast is the best time to be with Tibor, because he's not very busy and can be initiated into chit-chat without looking pained at neglecting his duties. He doesn't know I'm on the Nadir as a pseudo-journalist. I'm not sure why I haven't told him. Somehow I think it might make things hard for him. During ESB chit-chat, I never ask him anything about the Nadir, except for precise descriptions of whatever dorsal fins he's seen. Not out of deference to Mr. Dermatitis' injunctions, but because I'd just about die if Tibor got into any trouble on my account. Tibor's ambition is someday to return to his native Budapest for good, and with his Nadir savings open a sort of newspaper and bray type sidewalk cafe that specializes in something called cherry soup. With this in mind, 2 days from now in Fort Lauderdale, I'm going to tip the tipster way more than the suggested $3 US per diem, balancing out my total expenses by radically under-tipping both our liplessly sinister maitre d' and our sommelier, an unctuously creepy Ceylonese guy the whole table is christened the Velvet Vulture. Port call. Mornings in port are a special time for the semi-agoraphobe, because just about everybody else gets off the ship and goes ashore for organized shore excursions or for unstructured peripatetic tourist stuff, and the MV Nadir's upper decks have the eerily delicious deserted quality of your folks' house when you're homesick as a kid and everybody else is gone. We're docked off Cozumel, Mexico. I'm on deck 12. A couple of guys in software company t-shirts jog fragmently by every couple of minutes, but other than that, it's just me and the zinc oxide and hat and about 1,000 empty and identically folded deck chairs. The 12 aft towel guy has almost nobody to exercise his zeal on, and by 10 a.m., I'm on my 5th new towel. Here, the semi-agoraphobe can stand alone at the ship's highest port rail and look pensively out to sea, which off Cozumel is a kind of watery indigo through which you can see the powdery white of the bottom. In the middle distance, underwater coral formations are big cloud shapes of deeper purple. Out past the coral, the water gets progressively darker in orderly stripes, a phenomenon that I think has to do with perspective. It's all extremely pretty and peaceful. Besides me and the towel guy and the orbiting joggers, there's only a supine older lady reading Codependent No More, and a man standing way up at the forepart of the starboard rail videotaping the sea. This sad and cadaverous guy, who by the second day I'd christened Captain Video, has tall hard grey hair and Birkenstocks and very thin hairless calves, and he's one of the cruise's more prominent eccentrics. Footnote number 26. Other eccentrics include the bloated and dead-eyed guy who sits in the same chair at the same 21 table in the casino every day from noon to 3 a.m., drinking Long Island iced tea and playing 21 at a narcoticized underwater pace. The hairy-stomached guy of maybe 50 who sleeps by the pool every minute, even in the rain, a copy of Megatrends opened on his chest, and the 2 old couples who sit in upright chairs just inside the clear plastic walls that enclose Deck 11, never moving watching the ocean and ports like there's something on TV. End of footnote number 26. Pretty much everybody on the Nadir qualifies as camera crazy. But Captain Video camcords absolutely everything, including meals, empty hallways, endless games of geriatric bridge, even leaping onto Deck 11's raised stage during Tuesday's pool party to get the crowd from the musician's angle. He's the only passenger besides me who I know for a fact is cruising without a relative or companion, and certain additional similarities between him and me tend to make me uncomfortable, and I try to avoid him. From Deck 12's starboard rail, you can look down at the army of Nadir passengers being disgorged by the Deck 3 gangway. They keep pouring out of the door and down the narrow gangway. As each person's sandal hits the pier, a socio-linguistic transformation from cruiser to tourist is effected. A serpentine line of 1,300 plus upscale tourists with currency to unload and experiences to experience stretches all the way down the Cozumel Pier, which leads to a kind of mega Quonset structure where organized shore excursions and t-shirts and cabs or mopeds into San Miguel are available. The word around good old Table 64 last night was that in primitive and incredibly poor Cozumel, the US dollar is treated like a UFO. They worship it when it lands. Locals along the Cozumel Pier are offering Nadirites a chance to have their picture taken holding a very large iguana. Yesterday, on the Grand Cayman Pier, locals had offered them the chance to have their picture taken with a guy wearing a peg leg and hook, while off the Nadir's port bow, a fake pirate ship plowed back and forth across the bay all morning, firing blank broadsides and getting on everybody's nerves. Off to the southeast now, another mega cruiser is moving into dock. It moves like a force of nature and resists the idea that so much mass is being steered by anything like a hand on a tiller. I can't imagine what trying to maneuver one of these puppies into the pier is like. Parallel parking a semi into a spot the same size as the semi with a blindfold on and 4 tabs of LSD in, you might come close. Our docking this morning at sunrise involved an ant-like frenzy of crewmen and shore personnel and an anchor that spilled from the ship's navel and upward of a dozen ropes, which the crew insists on calling lines, even though each one is at least the same diameter as a tourist's head. I cannot convey to you the sheer and surreal scale of everything: the towering ship, the ropes, the anchor, the pier, the vast lapis lazuli dome of the sky. Looking down from a great height at your countrymen waddling into poverty-stricken ports in expensive sandals is not one of the funner moments of a 7NC luxury cruise, however. There is something inescapably bovine about a herd of American tourists in motion, a certain greedy placidity. I feel guilty by perceived association. I've barely been out of the USA before, and never as part of a high-income herd, and in port, even up here above it all on Deck 12, watching. I'm newly and unpleasantly conscious of being an American, the same way I'm always suddenly conscious of being white every time I'm around a lot of non-white people. I cannot help imagining us as we appear to them, the bored Jamaicans and Mexicans, or especially to the non-Aryan and hard-driven crew of the Nadir. All week I've found myself doing everything I can to distance myself in the crew's eyes from the bovine herd I'm a part of. I eschew cameras and sunglasses and pastel Caribbean wear. I make a big deal of carrying my own luggage and my own cafeteria tray, and am effusive in my thanks for the slightest service. Since so many of my shipmates shout, I make it a point of special pride to speak extra quietly to crewmen whose English is poor. But, of course, part of the overall despair of this luxury cruise is that whatever I do, I cannot escape my own essential and newly unpleasant Americanness. Whether up here or down there, I'm an American tourist, and am thus ex officio large, fleshy, red, loud, coarse, condescending, self-absorbed, spoiled, appearance-conscious, greedy, ashamed, and despairing. Up on 12 aft, Captain Video isn't filming now, but is looking at the harbor through a square he's made of his hands. He's the type where you can tell without even looking closely that he's talking to himself. This other white cruise ship is docking right next to us, a procedure that apparently demands a lot of coded blasts on its world-ending horn. But maybe the single best visual in the harbor is the group of Nadirites learning to snorkel in the lagoonish waters just offshore. Off the port bow, I can see a good 150 solid citizens floating face down, motionless, looking like the masked and bloated victims of some hideous mishap. From this height, it's a macabre and riveting sight. I've given up looking for dorsal fins in port. It turns out that sharks are never seen in pretty Caribbean ports, though a couple of Jamaicans had lurid if dubious stories of barracudas that could take off a limb in one surgical drive-by. Now right up alongside the Nadir, on the other side of the pier, is finally docked and secured, the MV Dream Ward, with a peach-on-white color scheme that I think means it's owned by a Norwegian cruise line. Footnote number 27. The Nadir itself is navy trim on a white field. All the megalines have their own trademark color schemes. Lime green on white, aqua on white, robin's egg on white, barn red on white, white being an invariable constant. End of footnote number 27. Its Deck 3 gangway now protrudes and almost touches our Deck 3 gangway, sort of obscenely, and the Dream Ward's passengers, identical in all important aspects to the Nadir's passengers, are now streaming down the gangway and massing and moving down the pier in a kind of canyon of shadow made by the tall walls of our two ships' hulls. A lot of the Dream Ward's passengers turn and crane to marvel at the size of what's just disgorged them. Captain Video, inclined now way over the starboard rail, so that only the toes of his sandals are still touching deck, is filming them as they look up at us. And more than a few of the Dream Wardites way below lift their own camcorders and point them up our way in a kind of retaliatory gesture, and for just a moment they and Captain Video compose a tableau that looks almost classically postmodern. Because the Dream Ward is lined up right next to us, almost porthole to porthole, with its Deck 12's port rail right up flush against our Deck 12's starboard rail, the Dream Ward's shore runners and I can stand at the rails and check each other out like muscle cars lined up at a stoplight. I can see the Dream Ward's rail leaners looking the Nadir up and down, their faces shiny with high SPF sunblock. The Dream Ward is blindingly white to a degree that seems somehow aggressive and makes the Nadir's white look more like buff or cream. Its snout is a little more tapered and aerodynamic looking than our snout, and its trim is a kind of fluorescent peach, and the beach umbrellas around its Deck 11 pools are also peach, whereas our beach umbrellas are salmon, which has always seemed odd, given the white and navy motif of the Nadir, and now seems to me ad hoc and shabby. The Dream Ward has more pools on Deck 11 than we do, and what looks like a whole other additional pool behind clear glass on Deck 6, and its pool's blue is that distinctive chlorine blue, whereas the Nadir's two small pools are both seawater and kind of icky. On all its decks, all the way down, the Dream Ward's cabins have little white balconies for private open-air sea gazing. Its Deck 12 has a full-court basketball setup with peach-colored nets and backboards as white as communion wafers. I noticed that each of the little towel carts on the Dream Ward's Deck 12 is manned by its very own towel guy, and that their towel guys are ruddily Nordic and wear neither sunglasses nor a look of Dickensian oppression. The point is that, standing here next to Captain Video, looking, I start to feel an almost purient envy of the Dream Ward. I imagine its interior is cleaner than ours, larger, more lavishly appointed. I imagine the Dream Ward's food being even more varied and punctiliously prepared, its casino less depressing, its stage entertainment less cheesy, its toilets less menacing, its pillow mints bigger. The little private balconies outside the Dream Ward's cabins, in particular, seem far superior to a porthole of bank teller glass, which now seems suddenly chintzy and sad. I'm suffering here from a delusion, and I know it's a delusion, this envy of another ship, but still it's painful. It's also representative of a psychological syndrome that I notice has gotten steadily worse as my luxury cruise wears on. A mental list of dissatisfactions that started off picayune, but has quickly become despair grade. I know that the syndrome's cause is not simply the contempt bred of a week's familiarity with the poor old Nadir, and that the source of all the dissatisfactions isn't the Nadir at all, but rather that Euro-American part of me that craves pampering and passive pleasure, the dissatisfied infant part of me, the part that always and indiscriminately wants. Hence, this syndrome by which, for example, just 4 days ago I experienced such embarrassment over the perceived self-indulgence of ordering even more gratis food from cabin service that I littered the bed with fake evidence of hard work and missed meals, whereas by last night I find myself looking at my watch in real annoyance after 15 minutes and wondering where the fuck is my cabin service guy with the tray already. And by now I notice how the tray sandwiches are kind of small, and how the wedge of dill pickle always soaks into the starboard crust of the bread, and how the port hallway is too narrow to really let me put the used cabin service tray outside 1009's door at night when I'm done eating, so that the tray sits in the cabin all night and in the morning adulterates the olfactory sterility of 1009 with a smell of rancid horseradish, and how this seems, by the luxury cruise's 5th day, deeply dissatisfying. Death and Conroy notwithstanding, we're maybe now in a position to appreciate the falsehood at the dark heart of Celebrity's brochure. For this, the promise to sate the part of me that always and only wants is the central fantasy the brochure is selling. The thing to notice is that the real fantasy here isn't this promise will be kept, but that such a promise is keepable at all. This is a big one, this lie. Footnote number 28. It might well be the big one, come to think of it. End of footnote number 28. And of course I want to believe it. I want to believe that maybe this ultimate fantasy vacation will be enough pampering. That this time the luxury and pleasure will be so completely and faultlessly administered that my infantile part will be sated at last. But the infantile part of me is, by its very nature and essence, insatiable. In fact, its whole raison consists of its insatiability. In response to any environment of extraordinary gratification and pampering, the insatiable infant part of me will simply adjust its desires upward until it once again levels out at its homeostasis of terrible dissatisfaction. And sure enough, after a few days of delight and then adjustment on the nadir, the pamper-swaddled part of me that wants is now back, and with a vengeance. By Wednesday, I'm acutely conscious of the fact that the AC vent in my cabin hisses, loudly, and that although I can turn off the reggae music coming out of the speaker in the cabin, I cannot turn off the even louder ceiling speaker out in the number 10 port hall. Now I notice that when Table 64's towering busboy uses his crumb scoop to clear off the tablecloth between courses, he never seems to get quite all the crumbs. When Petra makes the bed, not all the hospital corners are at exactly the same angle. Most of the nightly stage entertainment in the Celebrity Show Lounge is so bad it's embarrassing, and the ice sculptures at the midnight buffet often look hurriedly carved. And the vegetable that comes with my entree is continually overcooked, and it's impossible to get really numbingly cold water out of 1009's bathroom tap. I'm standing here on deck 12, looking at the Dream Ward, which I bet has cold water that'd turn your knuckles blue, and, like Frank Conroy, part of me realizes that I haven't washed a dish or tapped my foot in line behind somebody with multiple coupons at a supermarket checkout in a week. And yet, instead of feeling refreshed and renewed, I'm anticipating how totally stressful and demanding an unpleasurable return to total regular landlocked adult life is going to be, now that even just the premature removal of a towel by a sepulchral crewman seems like an assault on my basic rights, and the sluggishness of the aft elevator is an outrage. And as I'm getting ready to go down to lunch, I'm mentally drafting a really mordant footnote on my single biggest peeve about the nadir. They don't even have Mr. Pibb. They foist Dr. Pepper on you with a maddeningly unapologetic shrug when any fool knows that Dr. Pepper is no substitute for Mr. Pibb. And it's an absolute goddamn travesty, or, at best, extremely dissatisfying indeed. Some organized fun. Every night, cabin steward Petra, when she turns down the bed, leaves on your pillow, along with the day's last mint and Celebrity's printed card, wishing you sweet dreams in 6 languages. The next day's Nadir Daily, a little 4-page ersatz newspaper, printed on white in a royal blue font. The ND has historical nuggets on upcoming ports, pitches for organized shore excursions, and specials in the gift shop. The stern stuff in boxes, with malaprop headlines like Quarantines on Transit of Food and Misuse of Drug Acts, 1972. We've rounded the final turn and are steaming on our return vector from Cozumel toward Key West, and today is one of the week's 2 at-sea days, when shipboard activities are at their densest and most organized. This is the day I've picked to use the ND as a Baedeker as I leave cabin 1009 for a period well in excess of half an hour, and plunge headfirst into the experiential fray and keep a precise and detailed log of some really representative activities. 10 a.m. 3 simultaneous venues of managed fun, all aft on deck 9. Darts tournament, take aim and hit the bullseye, shuffleboard shuffle, join your fellow guests for a morning game, ping pong tournament, meet the crew staff at the tables, prizes to the winners. Organized shuffleboard has always filled me with dread. Everything about it suggests infirm senescence and death. It's a game played on the skin of a void, and the rasp of the sliding puck is the sound of that skin getting abraded away bit by bit. I also have a morbid but wholly justified fear of darts, stemming from a childhood trauma too hair-raising to discuss here. I play ping pong for an hour. 11 a.m. Navigation lecture. Join Captain Nico and learn about the ship's engine room, the bridge, and the basic nuts and bolts of the ship's operation. I am there. The MV Nadir can carry 460,000 gallons of nautical-grade diesel fuel. It burns between 40 and 70 tons of this fuel a day, depending on how hard it's traveling. The ship has 2 turbine engines on each side, one big Papa and one comparatively little Sun. Each engine has a propeller that is 17 feet in diameter and is adjustable through a lateral rotation of 23.5 degrees for maximum torque. It takes the Nadir 0.9 nautical miles to come to a complete stop from a speed of 18 knots. The Nadir can go slightly faster in certain kinds of rough seas than it can go in calm seas. This is for technical reasons that won't fit on the napkin I'm taking notes on. Captain Nico's English is not going to win any elocution ribbons, but he is a veritable blowhole of hard data. He's about my age and height, and is just ridiculously good looking. Footnote number 29. Something else I've learned about this luxury cruise is that no man can ever look any better than he looks in the white full-dress uniform of a naval officer. Women of all ages and estrogen levels swooned, sighed, wobbled, lash-batted, growled, and hubbub when one of these navally resplendent Greek officers went by, a phenomenon that I don't imagine helped the Greeks' humility one bit. End of footnote number 29. Captain Nico wears Ray-Bans, but without a touristic fluorescent cord. This is also the day my paranoia about Mr. Dermatitis contriving somehow to jettison me from the Nadir via Cabin 1009's vacuum suction toilet is at its emotional zenith, and I've decided in advance to keep a real low journalistic profile at this event. I ask a total of one little innocuous question, right at the start, and Captain Nico responds with a witticism. How we start engines? Not with a key of ignition, I can tell you. That gets a large and rather unkind laugh from the crowd. It turns out that the long mysterious MB in MV Nadir stands for motorized vessel. The MV Nadir cost $250,310,000 US to build. It was christened in Papenburg, West Germany, in 1992 with a bottle of ouzo instead of champagne. The Nadir's 3 onboard generators produce 9 megawatts of power. The ship's bridge turns out to be what lies behind the very intriguing triple-locked bulkhead near the aft towel cart on deck 10. The bridge is where the equipments are, radars, indication of weathers, and all these things. 2 years of postgraduate study is required of officer wannabes just to get a handle on the navigational math involved. Quote, also there is much learning from the computers. End quote. Captain Nico explains that the Nadir subscribes to something called GPS. Quote, the global positioning system is using the satellites above to know the position at all times, which gives this data to the computer. End quote. It emerges that when we're not negotiating ports and piers, a kind of computerized auto-captain pilots the ship. Footnote number 30. This helps explain why Nadir Captain G. Panagiotakis usually seems so phenomenally unbusy, why his real job seems to be to stand in various parts of the Nadir and try to look vaguely presidential, which he would accept for his habit of wearing sunglasses inside, which makes him look more like a third world strongman. End of footnote 30. The all-male audience here consists of bald, solid, thick-wristed 50-ish men who all look like the kind of guy who rises to a CEO of a company out of its engineering department instead of some MBA program. A number of them are clearly Navy veterans or yachtsmen or something. They compose a very knowledgeable audience and ask involved questions about the, quote, bore, unquote, and, quote, stroke, unquote, of the engines, the management of, quote, multi-radial torque, end quote, and the hydrodynamics of, quote, midship stabilizers, end quote. They're all the kinds of men who look like they're smoking cigars even when they're not. Everybody's complexion is hectic from sun and salt spray, and a surfeit of slippery nipples. A 7NC megaship's maximum possible cruising speed is 21.4 knots. No way I'm going to raise my hand in this kind of crowd and ask what a knot is. 12:40 p.m. I seem to be out on 9 aft hitting golf balls off an AstroTurf square into a dense mesh nylon net that balloons impressively out towards the sea when a golf ball hits it. Thanatopic shuffleboard continues over to starboard. Ominous little holes in the deck, bulkhead, railing, and even my little AstroTurf square testify to my wisdom in having steered clear of the AM darts tourney. 2 p.m. Now I'm in Deck 12's Olympic Health Club in the back area, in the part that's owned by Steiner of London. A kind of floating spa, and I'm asking to be allowed to watch one of the, quote, Vitomer/ionothermy combination treatment detoxifying inch loss treatments, unquote, that some of the heftier ladies on board have been raving about, and I'm being told that it's not really a spectator type thing, that there's nakedness involved, and that if I want to see it, I'm going to have to be the subject of one. Between the quoted price of the treatment and some pretty troubling references in the Steiner of London brochure to electrodes using Faratism and galvanism, I opt to forfeit this bit of bandaged pampering. If you back off from something really big, the creamy-faced staffers then try to sell you on a facial, which they say, quote, a number, unquote, of males Nadirites have pampered themselves with this week. But I decline this as well, figuring that at this point in the week the procedure would consist mostly in exfoliating half-peeled skin. 2:30 p.m. Now I'm down in Deck 8's Rainbow Room for, quote, behind the scenes, unquote. Meet your cruise director, Scott Peterson, and find out what it's really like to work on a cruise ship. Scott Peterson is a tan guy with tall, rigid hair, a high-watt smile, an escargot mustache, and a gleaming Rolex. Basically the sort of guy who looks entirely at home in sockless white loafers and a mint green golf shirt, and is one of my very least favorite Celebrity Cruises employees. Though, with Scott Peterson, it's a case of mildly enjoyable annoyance rather than the terrified loathing I feel for Mr. Dermatitis. The very best way to describe Scott Peterson's demeanor is that it looks like he's constantly posing for a photograph nobody is taking. He mounts the Rainbow Room's low brass days, reverses his chair, sits like a cabaret singer, and holds forth. There are maybe 50 people attending, and I have to admit that some of them seem to like Scott Peterson a lot, and to enjoy his talk. A talk that, not surprisingly, turns out to be more about what it's like to be Scott Peterson than what it's like to work on the good old Nadir. Topics covered include where and under what circumstances Scott Peterson grew up, how Scott Peterson got interested in cruise ships, how Scott Peterson and his college roommate got their first jobs together on a cruise ship, some hilarious boo-boos in Scott Peterson's first months on the job, every celebrity Scott Peterson has personally met and shaken the hand of, how much Scott Peterson loves the people he gets to meet working on a cruise ship, how much Scott Peterson loves just working on a cruise ship in general, how Scott Peterson met the future Miss Scott Peterson working on a cruise ship, and how Miss Scott Peterson now works on a different cruise ship, and how challenging it is to sustain an intimate relationship as warm and in all respects wonderful as that of Mr. and Miss Scott Peterson when you work on different cruise ships and lay eyes on each other only about every 6th week, except that now Scott Peterson's grateful to be able to announce that Miss Scott Peterson happens to be on a well-earned vacation and is, as a rare treat, here this week cruising on the MV Nadir with him, and is, as a matter of fact, right here with us in the audience today. And wouldn't Miss SP like to stand up and take a bow? 3:05 p.m. I've darted for a minute into Deck 7's Celebrity Show Lounge to catch some of the rehearsals for tomorrow night's climactic passenger talent show. 2 crew-cut and badly burned U Texas guys are doing a minimally choreographed dance number to a recording of Shake Your Groove Thing. Assistant Cruise Director Dave the Bingo Boy is coordinating activities from a canvas director's chair at stage left. A septuagenarian from Halifax, Virginia, tells 6 jokes and sings "One Day at a Time, Sweet Jesus." A retired Century 21 realtor from Idaho does a long drum solo to "Caravan." The climactic passenger talent show is apparently a 7NC tradition, as was Tuesday's special costume party. Some of the Nadirites are deeply into this stuff and have brought their own costumes and props. A lithe Canadian couple does a tango complete with pointy black shoes and a rose in teeth. The finale is apparently going to be 4 consecutive stand-up comedy routines delivered by very old men. These men totter on, one after the other. One has a 3-footed cane, another a necktie that looks uncannily like a Denver omelet, another an excruciating stutter. What follow are 4 successive interchangeable routines where the manner and humor are like exhumed time capsules of the 1950s. Jokes about how impossible it is to understand women, about how very much men want to play golf and how their wives try to keep them from playing golf, etc. The routines have the same kind of flamboyant unhipness that makes my own grandparents objects of my pity, awe, and embarrassment all at the same time. One of the senescent quartet refers to his appearance tomorrow night as a gig. 3:20 p.m. The ND neglects to mention that the trap shooting is a competitive, organized activity. The charge is $1 a shot, but you have to purchase your shots in sets of 10, and there's a large and vaguely gun-shaped plaque for the best score. I arrive at 8 aft late. A male Nadirite is already shooting, and several other males have formed a line and are waiting to shoot. The Nadir's wake is a big fizzy V way below the aft rail. 2 sullen Greek NCOs and earmuffs run the show. I'm 7th and last in line. The other guys refer to the targets as pigeons, but what they really look like is little discuses painted with day-glow orange of expensive hunting wear. The orange, I posit, is for ease of visual tracking, and the color must really help, because the trim bearded guy in aviator glasses, currently shooting, is wreaking absolute devastation in the air over the stern. I assume you already know the basic trap shooting conventions from movies or TV. The lackey at the weird little catapultish device, the bracing and pointing in order to pull, the combination thud and kertwang of the catapult, the brisk crack of the weapon, and the midair disintegration of the luckless pigeon. Everybody in line with me is male, though there are a number of females in the crowd that's watching the competition from the 9-aft balcony above and behind us. From the line, watching, 3 things are striking. A. What on TV is a brisk crack is here a whooming roar that apparently is what a shotgun really sounds like. B. Trap shooting looks comparatively easy, because now the stocky older guy who's replaced the trim bearded guy at the rail is also blowing these little fluorescent plates away, one after the other, so that a steady rain of lumpy orange crud is falling into the Nadir's wake. C. A clay pigeon, when shot, undergoes a frighteningly familiar-looking mid-flight peripeteia, erupting material, changing vector, and plummeting seaward in a corkscrewy way that all eerily recalls the footage of the 1986 Challenger disaster. All the shooters who precede me seem to fire with a kind of casual scorn, and all get 8 out of 10 or above. But it turns out that, of these 6 guys, 3 have military combat backgrounds. Another 2 are LL Bean model-type brothers who spend weeks every year hunting various fast-flying species with their papa in southern Canada. And the last has got not only his own earmuffs, plus his own shotgun in a special crushed velvet-lined case, but also has his own trap shooting range in his backyard. Footnote number 31, exclamation mark, end of footnote number 31, in North Carolina. When it's finally my turn, the earmuffs they give me have somebody else's ear oil on them and don't fit my head very well. The gun itself is shockingly heavy and stinks of what I'm told is cordite, small pubic spirals of which are still exiting the barrel from the Coriovet who preceded me, and is tied for first with 10 out of 10. The 2 brothers are the only entrants even near my age. Both got scores of 9 out of 10, and are now praising me coolly from identical prep school slouch positions against the starboard rail. The Greek NCOs seem extremely bored. I'm handed the heavy gun and told to be bracing a hip against the aft rail, and then to place the stock of the weapon against, no, not the shoulder of my hold the gun arm, but the shoulder of my pull the trigger arm. My initial error in this latter regard results in a severely distorted aim that makes the Greek by the catapult do a rather neat drop and roll. Let's not spend a lot of time drawing this whole incident out. Let me simply say that, yes, my own trap shooting score was noticeably lower than the other entrants' scores. Then simply make a few disinterested observations for the benefit of any novice contemplating trap shooting from a 7NC megaship, and then we'll move on. 1. A certain level of displayed ineptitude with a firearm will cause everyone who knows anything about firearms to converge on you all at the same time with cautions and advice and handy tips. Number 2. A lot of the advice in 1 boils down to exhortations to lead the launched pigeon, but nobody explains whether this means that the gun's barrel should move across the sky with the pigeon, or should instead sort of lie in static ambush along some point in the pigeon's projected path. 3. Whatever a hair trigger is, a shotgun does not have one. 4. If you've never fired a gun before, the urge to close your eyes at the precise moment of concussion is, for all practical purposes, irresistible. 5. The well-known kick of a fired shotgun is no misnomer. It knocks you back several steps with your arms pinwheeling wildly for balance, which when you're holding a still-loaded gun results in mass screaming and ducking, and then on the next shot a conspicuous thinning of the crowd in the 9-aft gallery above. Finally, 6. Know that the unshot discus's movement against the vast lapis lazuli dome of the open ocean sky is sun-like, i.e. orange and parabolic and right to left, and that its disappearance into the sea is edge first and splashless and sad. The headline entertainment. Other celebrity Showtime headline entertainments this week have included a Vietnamese comedian who juggles chainsaws, a husband and wife team that specializes in Broadway love medleys, and, most notably, a singing impressionist named Paul Tanner, who made simply an enormous impression on Table 64's Trudy and Esther, and whose impressions of Engelbert Humperdinck, Tom Jones, and particularly Perry Como were apparently so stirring that a special popular demand encore performance by Paul Tanner has been hastily scheduled to follow tomorrow night's climactic passenger talent show. For tonight, though, the Nadir Daily announces Celebrity Showtime. Celebrity Cruises proudly presents hypnotist Nigel Ellery. Hypnotist Nigel Ellery is British and looks uncannily like a 1950s B-movie villain. Introducing him, cruise director Scott Peterson informs us that Nigel Ellery, quote, has had the honor of hypnotizing both Queen Elizabeth II and the Dalai Lama, unquote. Footnote number 32. Not, one would presume, at the same time. End of footnote number 32. Nigel Ellery's act combines hypnotic hijinks with rather standard Borscht Belt patter and audience abuse, and it ends up being such an absurdly suitable microcosm of this week's whole 7&C luxury cruise experience that it's almost like a setup, some weird form of pseudo-journalistic pampering. First off, we learn that not everyone is susceptible to serious hypnosis. Nigel Ellery puts the Celebrity Show Lounge's whole 300-plus crowd through some simple in-your-seat tests to determine who is suggestively gifted enough to participate in the fun to come. Footnote number 33. I, who know from hard experience that I am hypnotizable, think about sports statistics and deliberately flunk a couple of the tests to avoid getting up there. End of footnote number 33. Second, when the 6 most suitable subjects, all still locked in their complex contortions from the in-your-seat tests, are assembled on stage, Nigel Ellery spends a very long time reassuring them, and us, that absolutely nothing will happen that they do not wish to have happen. He then persuades a young lady from Akron that a loud Hispanic voice is issuing from the left cup of her brassiere. Another lady is induced to smell something ghastly coming off the man in the chair next to her, a man who himself believes that the seat of his chair periodically heats to 100 degrees Celsius. The other 3 subjects, respectively flamenco, believe they are not just nude but woefully ill-endowed, and are made to shout, "Mommy, I want a wee-wee," when Nigel Ellery tells them good night. The audience laughs very hard at all the right times. And then there is something genuinely funny, not to mention symbolic, about watching these well-dressed US adult cruisers behave strangely for no reason they understand. It is as if the hypnosis enables them to construct fantasies so vivid that the subjects do not even know they are fantasies, which is of course funny. Maybe the single most strikingly comprehensive 7&C symbol, though, is Nigel Ellery himself. The hypnotist's boredom and hostility are not only undisguised but incorporated kind of ingeniously into the entertainment itself. Ellery's boredom gives him the same air of weary expertise that makes us trust doctors and policemen, and his hostile stage persona is what gets the biggest roars of approval and laughter from the crowd. He does unkind imitations of people's US accents. He ridicules questions from the subjects and audience. He makes his eyes burn Rasputinishly and tells people they're going to wet the bed at exactly 3 a.m. Each moment of naked ill will is followed by a palms-out assurance that he's just kidding, and that he loves us, and that we are a simply marvelous audience. The spectators, mostly middle-aged, it looks like, rock back and forth with mirth and slap their knees, and dab at their eyes with hankies. For me, at the end of a full day of managed fun, Nigel Ellery's act is not particularly astounding or side-splitting or entertaining. What it is weird. There's something crucially key about luxury cruises in evidence here. Being entertained by someone who clearly dislikes you, and feeling that you deserve that dislike at the same time you resent it. The show's climax has the 6 subjects all lined up doing syncopated rocket kicks. Because my own dangerous mesmeric susceptibility makes it important that I not follow Ellery's hypnotic suggestions too closely, or to get too deeply involved, I find myself, in my plush seat, going farther and farther away, sort of creatively visualizing an epiphanic Frank Conroy type moment of my own, trying to see the hypnotist and subjects and audience and ship itself with the eyes of someone not aboard, imagining the MV Nadir right at this moment, all lit up and streaming north, in the dark, at night, with a strong west wind pulling the moon backward through the skein of clouds. The Nadir a constellation, complexly aglow, angelically white, festive, imperial. Yes, this. It would look like a floating palace to any poor soul out here on the ocean at night, alone in a dinghy, or not even in a dinghy but simply and terribly floating, treading water, out of sight of land. This deep dissociative trance, Nigel Ellery's true unconscious gift to me, lasted all through the next day and night. This period I spent entirely in cabin 1009, in bed, mostly looking out the spotless porthole, with trays and rinds all around me, feeling a little bit dulled but mostly good. Good to be on the Nadir, and good to know that soon I would get off the ship, that I had survived, in a way, being pampered to death, in a way, and so I stayed in bed. And even though the trance made me miss the final night's talent show and midnight farewell buffet and Saturday's docking, at which there was an apparent even more crepe and waving and explosive goodwill, and a chance to have my after photo taken with Captain G. Panagiotakis, re-entry into the stresses and demands of quotidian landlocked real-world life wasn't nearly as bad as a week of absolutely nothing had led me to fear.